All right, now we're going to be forming lines on either side. If you're asking a question for Dr. Michael Shermer, be on this microphone. If you're asking a question for Dr. Frank Turek, be behind this microphone. And please remember that you are asking questions, and they're to be no longer than 30 seconds. All right, ladies and gentlemen. We're first going to have a question for Dr. Frank Turek. He is going to have 2 minutes to answer the question, and then Dr. Michael Shermer will have 1 minute to respond. After you ask your question of 30 seconds or less, please go to the end of the line immediately or be seated because there are no follow-up questions.
Oh, sorry. So for the sake of argument, let's say objective morality exists, there's a God, he has those rules played out for us. My question to you is how as humans, so you had a picture of Hitler and Mother Teresa up on the board. Those are two very devout Christians. Hitler's, if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler, a lot of his ideologies should come from the Bible. As a Jew, I know this very well. And
well, hold on. Hitler, a Christian? Do you think Hitler was seriously worshiping a Jew?
Hitler was very much Christian. His beliefs were, I've been, as a devout Jew, I've been to the Holocaust many times. You can go there yourself. They have lots of articles about how Hitler...
So your question was, is Hitler a Christian? And the answer is no.
I'll ask my question, if that's okay.
Next question, please.
Let me get the question out. Touchy subject, I'll continue. So, we can't know these rules without some form of interpretation. We're humans, that's the thing. We're not perfect beings. We have to interpret these rules. So you like to use that word, so I'll use the word yourself. How do we adjudicate between your interpretation of these objective morality and, let's say, my interpretation, or Mother Teresa's, or Hitler's interpretation of these objective morals?
Well, you use common sense principles, but what you're getting at here is how we know anything. Okay? Reality is that which is. Metaphysics is what is that which is. Epistemology is how we know that which is. And if you notice, Michael Shermer and I are differing over, I'm talking about what actually is. What is this particular moral law out there? And Michael's talking about how we know it. He's a step up. He's not dealing with the key question. Where does morality come from? Objective moral laws. Linguistics is how we communicate, and hermeneutics is how we know what's communicated. And how do we know? Just like we know when somebody says something to you. You use common sense principles. Like if I say to you, this MacBook Pro cost me an arm and a leg, you know that's a metaphor. You don't think I'm a double amputee, right? When the Bible says Jesus is the door, you don't think he has hinges. You think that is a metaphor for Jesus is the way to salvation. So sometimes it can be hard to figure out, admittedly, but that's true in all human communication. It can be hard to figure out what the communicator is saying. But in the Bible, I think the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things.
Dr. Shermer, you have a minute to respond.
Yep. Well, first of all, Hitler was Catholic. Whether he was serious about it or not, who knows? Most politicians use religion to whatever extent they can for power. I don't think the Nazi movement was either theist nor atheist. It was based in a sort of anti-Enlightenment, blood and soil, race-based utopian idea that was just a bad idea that hopefully will never rise again.
All right, we have a question now for Dr. Michael Shermer. He has 2 minutes to respond.
Dr. Shermer, I have a question for you. You say that science is used to make moral decisions. So you used as an example the Jews in World War II, that they didn't want to get killed, and there were so many slaughtered that you realize that that's wrong. So you must realize that 50 million children in the womb have been slain since 1970s. They didn't want to be killed. They were bleeding. They were hurt. They came out dead. So surely you don't believe in abortion, right?
Okay, so I deal with abortion in the moral arc. Clearly, this is a complex and hard issue for anybody on either side. If you take this perspective, you could look at, instead of the moral arc bending toward justice, like Dr. King said it was, it's bending backwards with the death of fetuses. Okay, so here we have a conflict between the rights of the woman, the mother, and the rights of the fetus. I don't think it's easily resolvable one way or the other. I come down, I'm pro-choice, personally against abortion, but I'm pro-choice. I slightly favor the rights of an adult woman for her reproductive rights for several reasons, not the least of which is for thousands of years men have lorded it over women by controlling their reproductive rights. So one of the shifts toward more rights for more people is to get men to quit trying to control women by having them control their reproductive rights. That's been one of the big movements. That said, it's a fair point. If you do it, you shouldn't do it lightly. I'd rather it not be done at all. The long-term solution is prosperity, education for women, access to birth control. You decline the amount of unwanted pregnancies, and therefore you eliminate the abortion problem through technology.
Dr. Turk, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, you want men not to put pressure on women, make abortion illegal, then they can't. Secondly, I've noticed on every college campus I go to, atheists complain about the God of the Old Testament. God of the Old Testament kills the Canaanites. Yet, when God plays God in the Old Testament, he's immoral. But when atheists play God here and kill people here, somehow that's a moral right. Can anyone justify that for me?
We have a question now for Dr. Frank Turek.
Yes. Your criticism of science is that there is no materialistic explanation of morality. But theism makes the truth claim of knowing right from wrong. Is it not then the theistic burden of proof to tell us which religion is true and which are false? To be a theist is to be atheist to all gods but your own.
I don't know if that's a question. What's the question?
The question is it not your burden of proof to tell us which religions are true and which are false?
Well, yeah, I think that's wise to try and figure out which worldview is true and which isn't. Michael thinks his materialistic worldview is true. I don't think it is. I think he can't even justify morality. He can't justify reason. He can't even justify the ability to do science. Again, because if we're molecules in motion, none of those things actually exist, or we couldn't do science if we're just molecular machines. I think, yes, you ought to give evidence for your worldview. That's what I try and do through books. And the Bible actually tells us to do that. The Bible actually says, always be ready to give an answer. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. The prophet Isaiah says, come let us reason together. Paul says, I'm set in defense of the gospel. Paul also says, let's destroy arguments and take every thought captive to Christ. So contrary to what most people think, Christianity is a worldview built on reason. You get evidence that it's true, and then you trust in the object of that evidence. Christianity is not blind faith. Atheism's blind faith.
You have 1 minute. Dr. Shermer.
I think this is an excellent point. It's one of the reasons I gave up on Christianity. I was a Christian. I was a born-again evangelical Christian for 7 years. One of the things that bothered me about it is when I started to study other people and other groups, other religions, other cultures, and so on, all of whom were as confident as I was that they were right. So that got me thinking, well, what are the chances that I happen to have picked the right one, which is completely determined by where I was born and raised and surrounded by Christians and so forth. And they're all wrong, all of them, all 10,000 other religions in the world, they're all wrong, and I happen to get the right one. That seemed to me a little too egocentrical.
All right, we have a question for Dr. Frank Turek.
Yes, thank you. Be it God or evolution that gave man free will, your opinion of the theory that science and evolution are an all-encompassing result of the universe's expression of that free will.
I'm not sure that was a question, sir. I didn't quite get it. Can you rephrase it?
In other words, be it molecules or biology, evolution, it came together.
Yeah.
And it functions.
Right.
In a free will. Now, be that free will a gift of God or a gift of evolution, how do you think of free will? How does free will, man's free will,
we have the
play into
ability.
this?
We have the ability to choose between choices within certain limitations. I can't choose to jump 60 feet in the air, obviously, But in the Christian worldview, there's a material realm and an immaterial realm. And the immaterial realm deals with laws of logic and consciousness and laws of morality and even laws of nature. In the materialistic worldview, everything's molecules, everything's material, everything's governed by the laws of physics. Theism can explain why these immaterial realities exist. Atheists cannot, but what atheists tend to do is they steal from God's world in order to make their case. So I can't see how you can have free will if there is no immaterial realm. If we're just governed by the laws of physics, then everything Michael Shermer says and everything I say is the result of the laws of physics. So why believe what I believe? Why believe what he believes?
All right. Dr. Shermer, you have a...
The free will of the universe, you're taking a pantheistic view of the world? Okay,
I think that we should go to
Let's
the next
talk later,
question.
you and me. So, yes, sir. Okay.
Dr. Shermer, you have
Well,
1
his
minute.
point that there's no little homunculus, there's no mini-me inside you making decisions for you. And that's true in the materialist case, but it's also true in the theist case. If there's a soul in there or some spirit entity making decisions for you, it's still not you making the decisions. It's still some other source doing it. So that doesn't really solve the problem. Although I still come down on the side of free will for various reasons that I describe in a chapter on that. But basically, I do believe that even though we live in a determined universe, materialistic universe, the choices that we make within it are still real choices that we should be held accountable for.
All right, we have a question now for Dr. Michael Shermer.
Mr. Shermer, you mentioned that Mr. Turek and other Christians are on the wrong side of the moral progress, that history is evolving much more towards individual rights. But my question to you is, many times in history, various different cultures coexisted with each other, where one culture would hold what we would consider regressive ideas, while other culture would hold progressive ideas. To give an example, although the Mongol Empire was violent, and its conquest was morally incorrect, they facilitated religious freedom and allowed any of its subjects to practice any religion freely, where at the same time in medieval Europe, they violently suppressed any other religious minorities. Also, in the Korean culture...
We need a question, please.
Yes, I'm getting to it.
Well, it's a 30-second question.
My apologies. So in light of those two cultures, coexisting with one another, wouldn't you say that our supposed march to progress is just simply that we are the militaristic and the cultural victor of our time?
Yeah. So I had a hard time hearing some of that, but the idea of the moral arc is that, yes, of course, you can have coexisting societies, groups, civilizations, nations, whatever, and as long as they don't bother each other, to each their own, and we all live in peace. Unfortunately, that's not the way the real world works. Too many people moralize about their beliefs, that you are standing in the way of us reaching utopia, and therefore we must put an end to you. We have to get you out of the way. And that's how, not just religions, but Marxist ideologies is another example of it. Any kind of collectivist ideology of any kind leads to that kind of moralizing and violence against individuals, and that's where the problem is. Again, I don't have any problem. All the Muslims I know are nice people, but clearly we can see in the daily news there's plenty that are not like that. That's what worries me, is those that turn to violence.
Dr. Frank Turek, you have 1
Michael,
minute.
do you in any way abhor the violence and threats that were rained down against the Indiana pizzeria who said they wouldn't bake a gay cake?
What? Okay, I don't think the big cake thing is all that it's been made up to be. I think this happened one example. If you were a Jewish baker and a neo-Nazi couple came in and said, we'd like you to make a cake, we're getting married, and put Hitler and a swastika on it, I think they should have the right to say, no, thank you, I'm not going to do it. So to this extent, I slightly favor on the side of the Indiana baker to say, no, thank you. Only slightly, because I believe in individual freedom and market freedoms, but admittedly, sometimes the law has to be pretty strong to put an end to things that are immoral, like slavery. It took a war and 650,000 dead Americans to put an end to slavery here. I don't think it would have ended peacefully on its own. It took Kennedy to send the federal troops to desegregate the South. It took Johnson to send federal troops for Dr. King to get from Selma to Montgomery. They wouldn't have made it otherwise without the federal troops armed against the bigots and racists there. Sometimes you have to come down on the side of what's right, sometimes with guns.
Due to the time restraints that Stony Brook University has placed on us, we're going to have to limit this question and answer session to only one more question from each of our debaters. Apologize, but we have no choice in this matter. And we will go with where we left off.
How about if we do 5-minute closing instead of 10-minute?
We're actually already reducing that to 6 minutes anyway.
I'll give up my closing statement.
Where's Dr. Brisbane? She can do anything. She had to go? Okay.
All righty, question for Dr. Frank Turk.
Thank you, by the way, Dr. Turek and Dr. Shermer, for coming tonight. If human beings are fallible and God can reveal his word directly to human beings, much like he did to the authors of the Bible, how do you know that the revelations to those fallible human beings about God's character, such as his perfect, honest nature, or revelations to yourself are indeed true and accurate?
Well, good question. It is true that people err, but people don't always err. I mean, there are many inerrant books out there. Usually they're kids' books with not a lot of writing in them. They're inerrant. A phone book that has all the names and numbers right is inerrant. There are many inerrant books. The question is, are there more than one inspired book? So just because people err doesn't mean we always err. Much of what Michael says is true. Hopefully much of what I say is true. Just because I'm a human doesn't mean I'm always going to err. Sometimes I'm going to tell the truth. And if there is a God and he does want to communicate his truth through people, he can ensure that they don't err.
Dr. Michael Shermer. Response.
Yeah, I think the question's a great one. It's a serious problem. Which prophets are the right ones? Which interpreters should we listen to? And clearly, historically, if you look at the long view, they don't usually agree. So historically, they sort themselves out, but the problem with religion is there's no systematic method to get at what's the actual correct answer. Other than, this faith is against that faith, and we have a war, and we yell and shout, and somebody comes out on top. That's how it's determined. That's a problem.
And our final question for Dr. Michael Shermer.
It's not the final question. Stony Brook has allowed us 2 more questions.
2 more questions.
2 more questions each.
Dr. Brisbane, thank you.
This question is for Dr. Turek. My question is, you said that God... Yeah.
No, you're supposed to be asking a question of Dr. Michael Shermer.
Oh, I'm okay with him doing it that way. It's okay.
All right, go ahead.
Basically, God is the standard of our morality,
Yes.
and a Platonic person with Platonic values who believes in Platonic idealism would argue the same thing. My question is, why do you have to presuppose that God is an actual being intervening in the course of human history based on your Christian convictions?
Yeah, excellent question. Plato had the forms, and the forms included moral forms. The problem is, if these moral forms really exist, like justice or virtue or selflessness, under what obligation are any of us under to adhere to those moral forms if these commands don't come from a person? Commands don't come from its, they come from whose. So we know that in our practical experience, and we know God by his effects. That's how we know he exists. We see creation, we know there must be a creator. We see conscience, we know there must be a moral lawgiver. We see a Christ, we know there must be a source for Christ, and then the scriptures. So we know God by his effects, and when we have a conscience that tells us certain things are right and certain things are wrong, we know that the being given us that particular conscience must be a moral being. And as I say, commands only come from whose, they don't come from it. So Plato's forms don't cut it.
We have another question for Dr. Michael Shermer now.
But having listened to the debate kind of veer off into some of your arguments, similar to Hitchens before he died, Dawkins, Silverman, why can't you, or these other men, be honest about what the Bible teaches about Christianity? What I mean by that is Catholicism, Mormonism, organized religion is always presented as this caricature of what the Bible really teaches. And I'm being sincere. Why can't you, being so well studied, debate an honest view of the Bible?
Well, what do you mean by, who's defining the honest part?
I mean by, like, if you would, I'm sure with the degrees you have, you studied whole books, not portions of books. So when you do that with the Bible, you come to a much different conclusion than what you are making the caricature out to be of what the Bible teaches. And I don't understand why that is.
Well, okay, first of all, when I was a Christian, I was an evangelical. This was in the early to mid-'70s. I didn't belong to any church. The evangelical movement at the time was sort of anti-church because we could see the hypocrisy of religions themselves. So the idea was, well, it's just me and Jesus, me and God, me and the Bible, whatever. Just make it as direct as possible so you're not dependent upon people's interpretations. The problem is when you go to a theology school like I did, I went to Pepperdine University. It's a Church of Christ school. So you start taking classes in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the life of Jesus, and so forth. And it's nothing but interpretations. It's this theologian says this theologian says that. Catholics say this, the Baptists say that, the Presbyterians say this. And you go down that road. This is the problem, is that, well, that previous question, who's doing the interpreting? And of course, if it's just me, and I'm not dependent on anybody else, it's still me. I have a point of view. All sentient beings have a point of view. So ultimately, we come back to that.
And Dr. Frank Turek, you have a minute.
Yeah, scientists say different things too, but nobody claims there's no objective world. You have many different scientists arguing over different forms of evolution and intelligent design and all these things, and nobody says there's no objective reality out there or no objective world. So just because there's disagreement doesn't mean there's not a right answer. Secondly, when it comes to Christianity, all Bible-believing people believe in the basic things, what C.S. Lewis would call mere Christianity. These are people who believe in the Bible. Now, there are many denominations out there that don't. They're no better than hymn-singing Rotary clubs, okay? Why go? Some of these more liberal churches, why don't you just go read the New York Times from the pulpit? What's the point? If you're not going to read the Bible, what's the point? But I think Christians agree on the essentials, that there is a God and you are not him. That there is a Savior. We've all sinned. Jesus is the Savior. He's God. He's going to come back. And if you trust in him, you will be saved. All Christians agree on that. They may disagree over modes of baptism, different kinds of liturgy, what music to play, what's the color of the carpet, all that stuff. But most of the major elements of Christianity, what we would call the fundamentals, even Protestants and Catholics agree on. In fact, conservative Catholics have more in common with conservative Protestants than conservative Protestants have in common with liberal Protestants. Liberal Protestants are hymn-singing Rotary clubs.
We have another question for Dr. Frank Turek.
Yes, hello, Dr. Frank Turek. Thank you for being here tonight. My question for you is, when you look at biblical Christianity and secular atheism and humanistic philosophy and religion, and I'm sorry, not religion, science, would you say that Christianity is mostly based off of just the work of God and not of man? Like man's choice doesn't save, God's sovereign grace and will and election before the world began saves a sinner without works. Whereas in evolution, it's the work of man. Look at us. Look how great we are. Look how great we evolved. It's all man-centered. It's a man-centered religion. Whereas Christianity is a belief in a divine creator who gives no glory to man, but to the God himself.
Well, I don't know if an evolutionist would agree with that characterization. I don't know if Michael would. He'll have an opportunity. But I'd rather talk about the fact that, when you get older, you start to lose your train of... Yeah, thanks a lot. Give me the essence of your question again.
Pretty much, creation is the work of God. Evolution is the work of man.
Oh, okay. I know where I was going with this. Okay, yeah. The center of the one-word theme of the Bible is redemption. You have paradise lost in Genesis, paradise regained in Revelation. Everything else is a story of redemption, where God, after he creates us and we fall, we sin against him, he literally enters the bloodstream of humanity. And that's what the Old Testament is all about, how Jesus, the Messiah, ultimately gets to the right time in history to come into human flesh, and he takes the sins of the world on himself, and by trusting in him, we can be saved, because God is a just being. He can't allow people to go unpunished. And if you don't want that, that's fine. God won't force you into heaven against your will. That's what the whole story of Christianity is. It's about redemption.
We have a minute from Dr. Michael Shermer.
Right, so you're a monotheist. You believe God and Jesus are one and the same, right? So the idea is that God sacrificed himself in the form of Jesus to himself to save us from himself. To me, this is just barking mad.
We have a final question of the evening for Dr. Michael Shermer.
Dr. Sherman, thank you very much. So I didn't really get where there is a moral, scientific morality, but so I'd ask the question, is the scientific morality what causes the survival of the race, or is the scientific morality what offends a person? And for example, if a person was the last hope of humanity, they had something in their blood, whatever, and they chose, I don't want to give up my blood, I'm immune to a disease that's going to wipe humanity out, but it's my right, I don't want to give up my blood. Should we go against his desire to be left alone, or is morality the survival of the race and anything that would cause that? You know?
Yeah, so this is a good question. The hard problem here is, like, you have these moral dilemmas, like a doctor has 5 patients in his 5 ORs that are all dying of organ failure. In the waiting room is a perfectly healthy person. Should he kill the healthy person, harvest the 5 organs, and save the 5? The answer is no. That would be immoral and illegal, by the way. Don't think about doing it. And the reason is because we have decided that the sanctity and autonomy and liberty of the individual trumps that of the group. The one is more important than the 5.
That's not scientific.
That is what we have decided over the last 2 centuries of Western civilization.
That's democracy, not science. There's no science.
No. Democracy, no. This is why we have restraints on democracy. This is why we have the Bill of Rights. It doesn't matter if 99% of Americans think we should kill Jews or whatever. The Bill of Rights says you can't do it. That's why we have the Bill of Rights.
And we have 1 minute from Dr. Frank Turek.
Well, I think a strength of Michael's book is he deals with these moral dilemmas in there, and he has a lot of different scenarios. I highly encourage you to get it and read it, because he really gets into depth on a lot of the scholarship there. So it's a very good aspect of Michael's book. But let me point out one thing about dilemmas. Dilemmas don't prove morality's relative. Dilemmas prove morality's absolute or objective. Because, you know, the old life raft thing, you know, if you got 3 people on a life raft, it's only fit for 2. If you don't pull somebody off, you don't push somebody off, everyone's going to die. What do you do? Or the same scenario that Michael just gave. The only reason it's a dilemma is because you know how valuable life is. In an evolutionary worldview, you push everybody off. Who cares? It doesn't matter. We're all just overgrown germs anyway. What's the point? So dilemmas actually prove that there is an objective morality. And if there's an objective moral law, there must be an objective moral lawgiver.
Well, now it's time for our closing statements, and since Dr. Turek had his turn to go first with the opening statements, we're going to allow Dr. Michael Shermer to begin first with the closing statements. You have 6 minutes.
Hey, Chris, could you give him 10? Because
No, let's just do, I don't have 10. It's 5.
All right,
5 is
well,
fine. Yeah.
I have a prepared one, so it may take me a little longer. But all right, I'll go as fast as I can. Jersey.
I'll tell you what. If you go first, then I can put together my.
Sure, that's fine.
You go first.
I'll be happy to do that.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yes, this is already proven to be a day without laws,
All right.
so go ahead.
There you go. But let me try and sum up. If you notice, the difference between Michael and me is the difference between ontology and epistemology. Michael is talking about how do we know the objective standard of morality. That's epistemology. That's how you know something. The question I'm trying to get at is, why does the objective standard of morality exist in the first place? And I'm saying that's best explained by God. If there's a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. Michael has to resort to materials, rocks. Do rocks have the authority to tell you what to do? I don't think so. This is the difference between knowing and justifying morality. You can know what a book says while denying there's an author, but there would be no book to know unless there was an author. Likewise, atheists can know objective morality while denying God exists, but there would be no objective morality to know unless God exists. Now, can evolution account for morality? No. Why? Because moral laws are not chemical or biological. They are immaterial and come from personal agents. You know what? That's what I was asking Michael before. What's the chemical composition of justice? He couldn't answer because it's a category mistake. Moral laws aren't made of materials, yet Michael's a materialist, so all he has to choose from are materials. Chemistry and biology are descriptive, not prescriptive. Evolution describes what does survive, not what ought to survive. Why humans? And which humans? Why not the Nazis rather than us? Should we rape to survive? I mean, if it's all about survival, you can survive and get your genes in another person by raping them. Should you do that? Also, should we murder the weak to help others to survive? Michael, to his credit, said no, but that's exactly what Hitler did using natural selection as his principle, Darwinian natural selection. And since evolution is a process of change, then morals must change. Rape may one day be considered good. Michael kept asking me, when are you going to change? When are you going to change? Well, I might change, but that doesn't mean I change for the better. And finally, why cooperate when not cooperating helps you survive? Michael talked, well, you got to cooperate to have a society. What if I'm Stalin and I got a lot of power and I don't need to cooperate? I can kill 20 million people and get what I want. Why should I care if there's no God or no judgment when I'm dead? In fact, Darwin had a great doubt about his whole theory of macroevolution, and I've been trying to get Michael to answer the question, if you're just molecular machine, or if you're just a molecular machine, or if your molecules in motion, a moist robot, why should you trust anything you believe? Darwin had a similar doubt. Here's what he said. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? Why should you believe your mind if it's put together by these random blind processes? In fact, my friend John Lennox puts it this way. He asks scientists, he says, tell me about how do you do science? And they normally come up, they say, well, I got this amazing machine. He goes, no, forget the machine. I'm talking about how do you do science here? He goes, oh, you mean with my mind? I mean my brain? Yeah, he says, tell me about the brain, Lennox asked the scientist. Tell me, how did you get it? And the scientist will say, well, my brain is the product of unintelligent processes that had no direction, and they just brought my brain together. And Lennox says, and you trust it? In fact, we know that these things which are immaterial exist. Minds, laws of logic, laws of mathematics, laws of nature. The very laws that you need to do science are immaterial. I mean, the law of gravity is immaterial. We can see its effect, but it's not a physical thing. It affects physical things, but it's not a physical thing itself. The laws of morality, love, and justice, these are all immaterial things that can't be explained by molecules in motion. In fact, Michael called Christianity a superstition. No, you know what the superstition is? It's atheism. That's the superstition, because you are not just a physical body, a mere molecular machine. That's a superstition called atheism. In fact, my friend Ed Fraser, who wrote the book The Last Superstition, makes this point. This is superstitious to believe everything's materials, because we know there are several things that aren't material. They're immaterial. In fact, I wouldn't even be able to talk here, and you wouldn't even be able to understand what I'm saying if we weren't trafficking in these immaterial laws of logic that aren't made of molecules. The truth is, you are a soul with a physical body. Now, he might say, well, if you damage your brain, you won't have a mind. True. If I damage my router, I won't have a Wi-Fi signal. But the router and the Wi-Fi signal are not the same. The router is the instrument through which the Wi-Fi signal is transmitted. They're two different things. Similarly, the brain is the instrument through which you have a mind, and if you damage the brain, you won't have a mind. However, the brain itself is not the complete source of your mind. There's somebody holding all this together, what all men know to be God. And it might be of interest to you that one day we will have a reconstituted body and brain in the resurrection body. So to sum it up, objective morality requires a map. It requires a moral standard outside of us. And when I say objective moral standard, I'm saying that's in God's nature. Michael hinted at what's called the Euthyphro dilemma. Does God look at another standard? In that case, he's not God, or he's unnecessary. Or does God arbitrarily make things up? If that's the case, then he's arbitrary. Well, no, God is the standard. There's not something beyond him, and he doesn't invent things. He is the standard. And so rules come from whose, not its. And God is the right answer. Now, last thing before I go. It's interesting when I go to college campuses. So I just have like two minutes here. Chris, is that okay? 2 minutes here? Is that okay?
You actually have 3.
Okay, I actually have 3. Okay. When I go to college campuses, I'll often ask atheists, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And on several occasions, they'll say, no. And I'll go, no. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here for many people. Quite frequently, the problem is here. I can tell you this, that the elephant in the room is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. People don't want there to be a God because they want to be God. They want to go their own way. See, and I have that problem sometimes too. It's inconvenient for God to exist when I want to do something I know I shouldn't do. The problem is many of us are on a happiness quest. We're not on a truth quest. If you want to have ultimate happiness, though, you got to go straight through truth. Now here's the ironic thing. This is the very ironic thing. The very people who are shying away from God because of morality, yeah, God does create a problem for morality, but you know what? God is the only solution to morality. In fact, let me explain what I mean. You see, we have a relative moral standard in our mind, from the moral giant Mother Teresa down to the moral midget Hitler. And next to Hitler, we put criminals. We know they're not quite as bad as Hitler, but they're bad. And then next to criminals, we put all the immoral people we all know. You know, our immoral friends and relatives who aren't quite as good as we are, because our picture's right here next to Mother Teresa, right? And then if we believe in heaven and hell at all, we arbitrarily draw a line in the sand and we say, these are the bad people, they're going to hell, and we're the good people, we're going to heaven. That's what we think. That's not the way the moral universe really works. No matter what moral standard we have, Michael and I may have different moral standards in certain areas, we can all admit we haven't lived up to it. None of us have. None of us have lived up to the moral standard. And the problem here is the line does not run up and down. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to one another. The actual line runs across the top, and all of us have fallen short of that standard. And what Christ did is he came and he lived the perfect life in our place. He's the perfect human being who took all of the punishment on himself, so all we need to do is trust in him, and his sacrifice will cover our sins. Michael had a funny way of putting that, but that's not the way it actually works. Jesus is a second person in the Trinity, and he has a human nature. His human nature isn't God, his divine nature is God. And when he comes to earth, he comes as the perfect human who takes his punishment on himself. If God doesn't punish sin, he's not just. He's not the standard of justice. And so he has to punish sin, and he chooses to find himself or to punish himself for us. You can't get a better moral than that. You sacrifice yourself for somebody else. So the purpose of his life was to be punished in your place. His life was a gift to you. Have you received his gift? If not, why not? Why wouldn't you? It's free. You go, I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing. Guess what? You don't have to. Because God will change you once you come to him.
Sorry, time is up. Dr. Michael Shermer, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you for cheering, but I have a challenge for you Christians. If you are a Christian, does anyone really know it? I mean, if they were to drag you into a courtroom like they do in Pakistan right now and try and convict you of being a Christian, would you be convicted or would you be acquitted? Hey man, there's not enough evidence here. Let this person go. If that's the case for you, you may want to reconsider how you've been living. The least we can do after what he's done for us is stand up for him.
All right, Dr. Michael Shermer, please.
Are we in church? I understand from my Twitter feed that there's the free thinkers of Stony Brook are here. Thank you. Thank you. I got somebody on my side. Oh boy. But hey,
Follow him to his car, please. Thank
I
you.
used to be a born-again Christian, so I figure if I'm wrong now, I'm still in, right? Because according to this religion, I can reconvert back at the last moment. Well, except I don't think I would do that for several reasons. One is what I mentioned before, is that the hubris of thinking that of the tens of thousands of religions and thousands of gods that people have believed in over the last 10,000 years, what are the chances that I, as a Christian, got the right one and everybody else is wrong? Historically, humans have found themselves to be egocentrically self-centered, thinking, of course I'm right, and all those other people are wrong, and it almost always turns out they were wrong. So to err is to be human, and that's the case. And that's the least of it. The problem of evil is a huge one. I'm not just talking about why did God allow the Holocaust or genocides, because you would say that's human free will. What about childhood cancer? Why should thousands, tens of thousands of infants, little children die of leukemia and other horrible diseases, not to mention what it does to the families who love them? Why would a good God allow that? What is the answer to that? Other than we're told, well, God works in mysterious ways. Well, it'd be nice if he worked in less mysterious ways and did something about it. But he doesn't, so it's up to us. It's always up to us. It's up to you. It's up to me to make the world a better place. Not to turn to some other supernatural force that may or may not come. Not to give up what we have now in hope of some blissful state in some other place. Here and now is what counts. Now is when you should be trying to do something to make the world a better place. Now is the time to make your relationships count with other people, not in some other world where this is a mere prepping stage for the next life. It's this life that counts, regardless of whether there's another life or not. And historically, this is what has driven the moral arc forward, expanding the moral sphere to include more people into our moral considerations. That is what has driven change. You and I, individuals standing up and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We demand the same rights as everybody else. I don't care what your religion is. This is what's right and fair. That's how it matters. That's what makes a difference. Not in some other life, but here and now. Who makes the rules? We make the rules. What did you say? The eternal referent is what we make of it. It's our rules. It's always been up to us. 100 years ago, you would think very differently about blacks and Jews and women than you do now. What happened? There's no new biblical scriptures that have come down on high through some prophet. No theologian has discovered a new way to interpret the Old or New Testament that said, thou shalt not enslave thy fellow man. It's not in there. Thou shalt not oppress women or blacks. It's not in there. It didn't come from religion. It never comes from religion. It comes from you and I. It comes from oppressed people saying, enough, stop it. I'm going to fight back. And then the people surrounding them start to take on the cause. And then it changes. And then it happens. And then religions get on board and go, you know what? That's a good idea. That's how it happens. It's up to you and I. So let me end with the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I started with, who is the inspiration for my book and my hero. He said, the great burden of life is to always try to keep that higher self in command. And every time that old lower self acts up and tells us to do wrong, let us allow the higher self to tell us that we were made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. Well, we are in fact made from the stars. Our atoms were forged in the interiors of ancient stars that ended their lives in spectacular paroxysms of supernova explosions that dispersed those atoms into space, where they coalesced into new solar systems with planets, life, and sentient beings capable of such sublime knowledge and moral wisdom. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. Morality is something that carbon atoms can embody, given 1 billion years of evolution, the moral arc. Thank you. Thank you.
Before I invite the founders of New York Apologetics up on stage, let's have a round of applause.